ask a question. How many of you in this room are associated in some way with heating, ventilation, air conditioning, water heating, controls, or whatever? Good. How many of you own a building? How many of you are mayors or on a city council? How many of you pay a utility bill? Anybody here pay a gas bill? Good. My name is Rick Bostian. I work for Water Furnace. I'm chairman of a group called the Hydronic Industry Alliance Commercial. Why Commercial? Because we're part of RPA, but our focus is on commercial buildings. This presentation today is sprung out of, as you see on the screen, ASHRAE and NYSERDA have been running and will run for a period of about 8 or 9 months seminars on what they're calling community heat pump systems, which is what NYSERDA in New York that puts out rebates and rules, and the electric utilities have called their system. Today we're going to talk about 5G hydronics. 5G only means 5th generation. It doesn't mean it's tied to your telephone. But I did my first 5G system in 1973. Well, actually in April 1973. And it wasn't called 5G, it was just called something smart to do. And the advantage was there was a big lake from a hydroelectric dam, and they ran the water past this school building and several other buildings, and then back in those days they sort of dumped it in a water feature that ran back into a river. So, but that was a long time ago. How I got involved is IAPMO got involved with adding district energy systems to the code. There really isn't code issues that address what are called 5G districts. And how this all got started is first generation was steam, which I highlighted there at the bottom, and then gradually each district system got to cooler and cooler water temperatures, primarily because of thermal leakage and kind of going in the opposite direction of I really need really hot water so I can have big delta T's so I can get my GPM down. The difference about 5G is it's two-way energy flow. So the district system is both a heat and a sink, and it's really so that we can capture and manage energy. Heat flows right now. If you look at generations 1 through 4, or if you look at a lot of our buildings, it's one way. You're either heating and then it's done, you're cooling and then it's done, or it goes around, comes back. But in a district situation, it gets a little more difficult. What we look at for 5G in a building is what the hydronic advantage is. Tying now water heating and air conditioning together. I mean, how many of you stayed in a hotel recently? Anybody eat in a restaurant lately? You know, those are buildings that use a lot of water. And if you look at a ton of air conditioning, it's got if it runs about 8 hours, it'll still only produce enough BTUs to heat 2 or 3 gallons of water. So in 1980 somewhere, I had a hotel vice president of facilities say, I wonder why I have a chiller. If I could just capture all this heat, I could heat the water. And he had just gotten a report that at those days, Starwood's highest chain, they used 200 gallons of hot water per heat, as they described it. That doesn't mean they used 200 gallons of water in every room. What that means is the hotel, when they divide their expenses by the number of rooms, then they call it per heat. So he just got a report that they were using 200 gallons of hot water. And that's where we started that conversation about, gosh, we could just put all the air conditioning in the hot water, it would work. Well, today's technology is really allowing us to do that. So The benefit of a 5G system is it's an ambient loop. Now somebody says, what do you kind of call an ambient loop for? Well, you got hot water, you got cold water, that all sort of makes sense. Ambient, most of us think about ambient, we think about, well, what it is here in the room, or what it is outside. So whether it's ambient temperature is the average of the air temperature, or what's the temperature of the ground, if you think about what's the temperature of water that comes into your building. It's because it's in the ground. And because it's buried, that temperature is also the ambient of the air that you're around. So in Texas, it's warmer, and in Minnesota, it's colder. But the advantage is that it's this heat source and heat sink, and that's what this is all about. So I'm not here to say this is how we're going to do it. I'm just here to expose you to the idea of this district or this building using equipment to capture heat. Now, the ASHRAE and NYSERDA presentation is focusing on heat pumps. But the 5G district doesn't require heat pumps, although it uses a lot of heat pumps. It could be just a coil or a heat exchanger, or like in Denver, they're recovering heat from the sewers system. An interesting sidelight there, they had to actually go to the city and say, now, somebody else can get this idea that we have and start taking the heat before it gets to us, right? We made the arrangement, we're going to use it. So there's details like that that have to be looked at, and it's why IAPMO got involved and say, what is the code? What should we do? Where do you go for those kinds of answers? So, what's 5G hydronics all about? Heat rejection. We're not talking about electrification in the terms of everything else. This is an HVAC type presentation, so we talk about beneficial HVAC and water. And that means use less electricity and use less gas and capture and manage the heat in your building before you buy new. And the extension of that is in a building. We always thought, well, core and perimeter, occupied, unoccupied. But in a building, if you have as you insulate your buildings, almost every building will become kind of net cooling. But the purpose of the 5G system is it's not at the same time. When are things happening? So it's the simplest logic to me to explain how a 5G system works is how many people are familiar with putting water source heat pumps in a building? Okay, about half of you. So that in the old days, it was a simple, low-cost system. Where I first started working, schools had a rule that you could only put in 2 pipes. And being in Seattle, they didn't really need a lot of cooling. They got it down to about 250 every day. But they could put in a 2-pipe system, uninsulated, and get free cooling. They were putting in a 2-pipe heating system, but the advantage to the school was when they got free cooling. And really what was going on is every room had to have a little small unit for the right size for the classroom, and then what are you going to do with the different parts of the building. And I want to talk a little bit about how water source heat pumps have changed, because there is a lot of thought that anytime you're doing water source heat pumps, you have to use individual small packages, and that's not the case anymore. So the logic that's applied was pretty simple. So as I said, back in the 70s, it was a lower cost system, and you could do 2 pipes, and a tenant could buy his own units. We thought we were selling energy efficiency, but really what we were doing was selling the ability to put in your cooling tower, your boiler, run your main piping, and then as the tenants came in the building, they could buy their own units. Because you didn't know what the zoning was going to be. And there's still jobs that are done that way today. They're just several floors that's pre-sold, or there's a couple of floors that aren't. So it was a simple logic. And the 5G concept now becomes something that individually, we probably, unless we are a developer or own our own buildings or multiple buildings, it's not something that we can do on our own. So my goal is that you understand it and say, hey, is this something we should do? Should we do this around, I'll give you an example, around an elementary school that was in an area of Chicago that it was just going downhill, getting ready to close the school. The city got together and they said, we can take this park and we'll put a geothermal loop field in the park. And now you'll have a new school, and the school is impressive. If you went to shoot a free throw in their gymnasium, it had an arc to show you that was at 90 degrees, that the free throw line was 80 degrees. If you walked the hallway, there was history lessons. If you sat in the kindergarten classroom, you saw the eave troughs drain into a raised bed to grow flowers and stuff. So it revitalized the area because you got together and you did some things. So there's a lot of rules that come down that tell us you can't have that anymore, or we can't do this anymore. The idea of 5G districts and in your building is to say, let's put energy efficiency in the street. Now instead of saying, I have a building that it doesn't make sense for me to buy an expensive chiller, expensive boiler, or a IAPMO cooling tower, because why? I can't make it work. The idea of the district is, today, if it's hot water or cold water, is I've got a big central plant and it delivers water that you can use. This is, there's still going to be a central plant that's going to do the pumping. If the whole thing's 100% geothermal, then they may not need other equipment like boilers or cooling towers or high efficiency stuff. But the idea of 5G is that if you do, that's fine, because it's being managed to the good of the district. So you take an elementary school and it's a hub, and they've got a geothermal field, and then they're around them 40 or 50 houses are all kind of become an environmental neighborhood. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. I mentioned equipment because there was so much emphasis early on that the 5G districts had to be 100% geothermal. In fact, one of the first studies that was done in New York, the only location to put in ground loops to study the feasibility was in the gas pipes right away. And for those of you that understand how big a ground loop can be, to say that the only place you can put a ground loop in for this building is in the gas utility right away. It surprisingly still showed that, hey, if it was all residential and people couldn't do residential on their own, that together they could make it work. On a bigger scale, you look at geothermal in the district as a thermal opportunity. Do I want to, the whole idea is, do I want to store heat? Is it a good idea to take heat from this building and move it to another building? That's what we're looking at. So there's a lot of different manufacturers that make heat pumps. Part of my point is, this can also be just a heat exchanger, just a coil, just a whatever, because what's going to be good for this group to go together? Is it a developer that is going to say, look, if you come in here, we've got an old, it's an out-of-date mall, it's falling apart. We're going to put housing in there. We're going to put retail in there. We're going to put parking, whatever, garages, exercise facilities, whatever, and we've got plenty of room to do it. We can do the base geo. We can add it as technology changes. You can add stuff, take stuff away. And part of what I wanted to show or wanted to explain is, when you look at heat pumps now, how many people think there's a water source heat pump that's bigger than like 5 tons? 1, 2, 3. Who would say, oh, there's a 300-ton water source unit? Only one guy, but I know him. So, and this guy knows too. So so the thing is now is that depending on buildings, and especially with what's going on with COVID, as I look at all of you wearing your mask, you have to be able to, how am I going to move air? How am I going to clean the air? What am I going to do? How do I interface into other equipment? So there's water-to-water heat pumps that are basically, it's a chiller. It's just a reversing chiller. The district can have chillers. The district can have boilers, cooling towers. But what we're doing is you're saying, move that cost off of the individual. Don't make it the individual has to bear the burden for energy efficiency. That's what we're looking at. So you need to look at a building and you say, how am I going to heat it? How am I going to cool it? How am I going to move air? Am I going to move air? Am I not going to move air? Whatever it is, there's equipment that can make this happen. VAV heat pumps, water to water, 140 degree water, not a problem. Okay. So I'm just going to show you something really quick. Look on the right-hand side of that screen, and you'll see it's basically a water chiller, boiler, but at the bottom, you see something that says source. That would be where the 5G water goes. That water would go in there, and then the two other one's for hot, one's for cold. You don't reverse the compressor. You just take hot to one side, cold to the other side, and whatever's the net goes to the source. In this case, it would go from his building to his building to his building. Now the water would be going past those buildings at like 4, 5, 6 miles an hour. So it's what's happening at that point in time becomes kind of critical. But it makes the advantage of not dealing with, over the whole year the building is net cooling, or over the whole year the building is net heating. It's what's happening right now. Is our kids in school but nobody's home? Well, you almost can't say that anymore. Now everybody's home and everybody's in school and not in school or whatever. So it's a matter of identifying what you need at each district. So the equipment is there, it's the thought processes. How are we going to build this energy district, so to speak? So it's even the difference of the building owner is going to have some equipment. Or maybe the building owner has something that is an advantage to the district. It's about thermal opportunities, it's about capturing and managing heat. That's what this is all about. So many of you have seen this kind of a slide before out of the energy information site. And so they're looking at that, talking about different categories of buildings. If you're thinking about a district solution, now you're looking at those buildings and going, which one's heating, which one's cooling when? Which hours, which not, and when is it doing something, when is it not? And is it day to night? Is it over a whole period? And then can we make something work? So to give you a little more perspective on why this needs to happen, here's a slide that shows residential energy consumption. And the next slide, which is commercial, basically shows the same thing. We've been in electrification mode, especially since the 70s with the fuel crisis. But that yellow line is electricity consumption, going up. And gas is kind of going flat. If you look at it commercially, electricity, especially if you can't read it, but where it starts to go up is kind of in the 70s with the fuel crisis. And just the availability of more things. When New York City did their first benchmarking, they showed commercial office buildings using more energy as the buildings got newer. That's like arguing with somebody about my utility bill went up. I know, but you didn't have air conditioning before. Or you only air conditioned one room. Now your bill's higher because I made the building better. But in their residential, in their multi-story residential, the costs were going down. And the reason the costs were going down was they were going to central systems in the building instead of unitary air conditioners all over. We even used to make air conditioning units with hot water coils on top of them because the hot water came from the city. But if you wanted air conditioning, you did that yourself. So it had to be unitary. There wasn't any idea that it would be central. Then they found out, hey, you know what? I really prefer a central system, and those central systems were performing better. So the next slide, looking at, well, what's the electric power sector doing? Well, they're using less coal, but they're using more natural gas. But what has been on the bottom of every slide I've shown you so far is our issue is still peaks. How are you going to control peaks? Well, you control peaks by having people not throw heat away. And if everybody has a more efficient system, because energy efficiency is in the street, and we're sharing the energy among those buildings, then we have an opportunity to reduce consumption because we don't need to buy new energy. One of the first comments about a water source heat pump system was the owner never bought heating and cooling at the same time because it operates to a deadband. And the loop, the 5G loop, will do the same thing. It'll operate to an operating range, and it may have to be customized based on how the district starts. Who's involved first? The difficulty in the United States is what? Independent ownership. So how do you get everybody to go together and say, we want to do this? There has to be some advantage to it. And sharing energy among buildings, even being what you might be considered to be the bad actor. Why is he a bad actor? Well, he's just got way too much heat. Can that building now be in a group where we all use that heat? And he actually, instead of looking for an energy credit, he's actually providing energy that the district would look at and say, we're using your heat. We like your heat, we need it. So, same thing with cooling. That is the result of cooling, but the same thing is, I'm heating a lot of water. I need BTUs to offset. How can I do that? And there's equipment to do that now. This one, maybe more just an aggregation slide, because this is the natural gas consumption compared to industrial consumption, residential consumption, and commercial consumption. And all of those lines are flat except for electric power, which is using more and more natural gas. One of the issues I had with solar is, well, you're bringing power to people that weren't contributing to the issue of climate change because they don't have anything. They're not the big polluters. The big polluter right now is the electric utility, which they're trying to get greater and greater. Our point is, how do you reduce the consumption? You reduce the consumption by not having to buy new energy. And some of the early studies have shown that if you do a residential district, then everybody's doing the same thing. If you do mixed use, now you can actually get to the point where everybody's offsetting each other. But when it first starts, you're going to have to say, if we need heat, we got to have, what are we going to get? We got to have a boiler. Are we creating this district because we're next to a lake, we're next to a river, we're like in Denver, there's a sewer system here, and that water needs to get colder before they dump it in the river? Or it needs to be colder before it gets to the treatment facility, because if it's too hot, bacteria won't do its job. These are the things that you have to think about. So where's the energy being used in the building? When is it being used? I thought this was interesting. This was put out by an Orlando utility, where that chart on the left is you could pick any state, and it sort of shows you what is the energy profile inside buildings. And then I was all excited when I saw the little graph up there at the top right, because it kind of showed when they were using the energy for what. And then I looked at it, and that's from a school in California. So it's where do we get the information? So when we're getting ready to do a district, it's not a fixed idea. It's you hear people talk about when you have a silver bullet. This isn't a silver bullet, and maybe some of you have heard even the silver buckshot idea. Well, that buckshot still has to be aimed. It can't be. And some people like me that burn on, you kind of go, well, I can't really knock down big targets with buckshot either. Bigger than with lighter weight shot, but I'm confined to what I'm trying to do. So you're looking at hourly, and one of the things that's kind of cool is NREL just added geothermal heat pumps to their database for their program that they call REOP. And what's cool about it is what it's for is to try and show a building owner that if you invest in batteries and PV and whatever else, kind of what your payback might be. But in doing that, when you go through the program, they've actually done a lot of default information, almost showing hourly total electrical consumption or consumption by whatever source for a lot of different building types. So it gives you an idea that there is some information, and you're going to need to get it from some source. Our particular group puts out software called BEST. It has in it a monthly use, where of electricity and fossil fuels separately by each system type that you pick. And we're adding to that now demand. You detailed a system. What's happening at demand? Because all modeling software right now uses bin weather data, which minimizes peaks in the data. If I'm a consultant and I'm laying out a building, I don't select equipment at the worst possible design day. I use ASHRAE data for where I design, how I size equipment, how it works, and some of it. In the 70s, for example, HUD put out a rule that you couldn't have a building cooled down lower than a certain temperature and heat higher than a certain temperature. And then in the 80s, I got involved as I guess you call it forensic, saying, well, here's your problem. That building is no longer a HUD project. It is now a condo association. And the condo association is not happy that their building will only get down to 76 degrees. And by the way, you took an enclosed courtyard, I'm talking about the city cage right now. You took an enclosed courtyard and opened it up to have a really nice wide open place so that now every condo has its exterior on all sides. So things change, and that's one of the things about a district. It's changeable. It's not brand new, it's being done. Here's some examples of different types of projects. And NYSERDA has, I think, 7 or 8 different projects going right now. But it's been done mostly where there's one owner involved. The difficulty with 5G district, otherwise when you start getting multiple owners that have different thought processes. But when we look at it, it's an opportunity, it's a use of thermal opportunities, it's capturing heat and managing it. And it can have, for it to really grow, it's going to have to be something driven to pull people together to say, why am I want to do it? So you've got all kinds of buildings. They've all got their own opportunities of what they need to do to satisfy their building. Especially the hotels here in this city, you're not going into them expecting them to hand you a piece of paper that says, we're an energy conscious hotel. Please turn your thermostats down and only use 1 gallon of water today. Now, there was a time I was in Oregon and I did get told that, and there are some resort cities right now that are being told similar things. So the idea is we got to get the consumption down, and we have to harvest our heat, and we have to manage it. So to manage it, then we can get ourselves into a position of energy sharing so that we have beneficial HVAC and water. Less electricity, less fossil fuel, less refrigerant, but manage peaks. The biggest thing about the district and the biggest thing about hydronic systems in an individual building is to get rid of peaks. Make that peak lower by recycling the energy inside the building. And the way to do that is get that heated water, take it out in water, run it through a coil, run it through a heat exchanger, run it through a heat pump, which would be nice for me, but it's that opportunity. Can you do it now? Can I do it later? Oh, did I just buy something? How does that fit? So there's even the federal government right now is doing a program. DOE's announced their cold climate heat pump challenge. And when you talk about a district, it's a matter of how you want to do it. But the thing about this challenge is they're saying, what is the capacity of the units when it's minus 15? Will it still heat? Does it still cool? If it's minus 16, does it quit? But that challenge has been accepted by 6 major manufacturers to work on. It's going to take all the refrigerants or whatever. It's still looking at it and say, okay, here's where we take care of this energy. Here's the best way for this guy to do this. This is better than what he had. And how can you make it together? And it may be, well, if the building right next to me could use part of my energy, how do I do that? So part of our group, our focus in IAPMO was to get it in the codes to start the conversation. Because if you go to a city planning, that's why I asked if anybody was here with a city planner, and you say, well, we want to do this. They say, well, what are the rules? Oh, well, you can't. It doesn't get things done when you're trying to bring a lot of people together. Now, it is in the ground, so it is resilient. What we're aiming for in the temperature to be the source and the sink at the same time is the ground temperature. Part of the problem becomes distribution. How are we going to do it? Who's going to own it? Who's going to make it work? And in my experience, where we have a rural electric co-op that didn't do a district, but what they did was they were losing money on every home. Even though people were paying the bills, just the cost of fuel that they had to buy to supply electricity, they were losing money on every home. Their solution was they own ground loops. You build a house in their area, they put it in. You pay a fee. The electric utility now gets wintertime income. The housing area is growing, and now they don't lose money on every house. Mostly campuses, districts like that are really looking at it. Like Princeton University has been going through this phase of first a geothermal building, then a geothermal loop, then adding more, then doing things with adiabatic cooling, doing things with dry coolers, saying, oh, we don't need the heat from that building, let's throw it away. We don't need to keep it. So in some cases, the district may perform better than if you tried to size a ground loop for the whole building. Because the purpose of the district is this managed. You're in this window, so that I know I'll always be able to heat and cool with efficiency as the goal. But energy transfer is the big part. So 5th generation, the big key is going to be who owns it. Who can look at it? Who is it that looks at long-term investment and makes money? Right now, that's utility companies. In Oklahoma, we're all over the air right now because last year, our gas utility bought a whole bunch of gas. And they said they spent $1.3 billion. And now they're trying to get legislation passed so that the people of Oklahoma that are on that gas service will pay to offset that monthly for 25 years. Everybody's bill already went up, and now you're saying they're going to add $7.28 to everybody's bill for 25 years. Now, a lot of people looked at that, and that's just unfair. I hope they continue working at that, but there's a bigger problem. The bigger problem is what makes us think that it's not going to happen again. But the other thing it's positioning on is, well, if you get off, if you pull off, if you quit your gas service, you got this 25-year mortgage payment that we assign you, so there's going to be a fee to stop using natural gas. And it's all going to make sense, and I'm glad I don't have to worry about it. Anyway, so back to what we're looking at with the 5th generation. In the building, net the energy in the building as best you can, net the energy between buildings. One of the thought processes is, where do you run the laterals? Where do you put another set of pipes? If anybody's been involved in trying to put a district system in, you know, running the pipe and getting permits to go under the street and try and get next to the sidewalk and everything else is a real issue. So, a municipal district, my thought process, wastewater ditches. And the utility that manages the district is the water district. And the reason is they could buy into the idea that we're going to use less energy. It's sort of difficult for the electric utility and the gas utility to get into an idea that says we're going to use less. And it may be easier to get you and you and you to buy into a water utility that is all things water already and monitors your district system, and the revenue goes to improving your water quality and water service and sewer treatment all at the same time. So a new development, a new area, or a major remodel, they're also the ones that know about it early. And you can't go back and do this to a bunch of existing buildings just anytime you want to. There needs to be some major work going on in the street. So, what about power companies? You bet. There's electric utilities right now running case studies. There's gas companies right now running case studies. They have a thing for the gas company is that if they have distribution that's bad, it needs to be replaced, they have an ability then to compare what is it that we can do that's less money. And some of that is they're looking at the idea of a district system. Or will we be looking at centralizing the gas? Not having distribution all over every building or even in every building, but back at the district with super high efficiency boilers. Or not having cooling towers on every building, but having high efficiency adiabatic cooling tower or logic or dry coolers at the district level. Something that the individual really can't do on their own. They can't. It's not scalable to an individual, but it's scalable to the district. So that's what we're looking at. Simple 5G. It's distributed. The key is bidirectional energy flow, and the reason it's bidirectional is to capture and manage. So that's what we're looking at. Don't make it difficult. This is one of these things that needs to be simple. If it gets too complex, like a lot of district energy systems are so complex that it's very difficult to do. The nice thing about this, it's the same advantage there was in a building. It's managed to a range, not, oh, I have to have have 85-degree condenser water, I have to have 42-degree chilled water. That, doesn't work like that. And a lot of the equipment is fairly simple. So I've coined a new term for this show, and it has to do with that silver bullet. This isn't a silver bullet. And I sort of chided silver buckshot. So what I want all of you to do when you leave is cast the silver net. Because if any of you work with wildlife departments, since we're in that hunting and whatever mode, how do they manage game? Capture, tag, record, and manage. So get out there and throw that silver net, grab the energy, bring it all together, and I appreciate your attention. I'll answer questions. This is, this is important to me. I have a beautiful family. I'm somewhat concerned about how their future is going to go, but they're all smiling and happy when they're looking at me. That's all that matters. Okay, any questions? Yeah.
You were saying that more buildings are going to single center systems, and it's been my experience, we have a big system installed in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but in the 90s they start going away from that.
I think what you're running into, and I don't know specifically what you're thinking about, but it's sort of like who is in control of that particular decision, and is that the best thing that's available to them? Can they do a building, especially if it's an older building, can they do a piece of it at a time? The advantage of a central system is that you've got diversity. Now, if it becomes more of a thought process about, I do need to capture this, I can preheat my outside air, I can heat water. I have a building that doesn't use a lot of water. So what am I looking at? Well, that's when you're looking at zoning, but for it to be effective, then are you changing energy throughout the whole building? And that's the message we're trying to get out. That if you get it, if you put hydronics, hydronics is that net. It allows you to put everything in there, and of course it's a little bit of a play on net energy, but netting the energy in the building between HVAC and water. And where it's been a problem, I think, maybe in the past, is that especially heat pumps didn't heat water high enough. Well, now heat pumps will readily do 140-degree water. And that's critical because a woman I admire a lot, her name is Dr. Harriet Burge. She's a microbiologist at Harvard. And she says, I don't understand the utilities saying lower the temperature of the water in the tank. I thought you guys were engineers. So if the water in the tank's 140, don't you have to use fewer gallons of it? But from my perspective, it needs to be 140 because you got to kill everything. And so it has to get to 140 once a day at least. But so that's the only reason that 140 becomes a sticking point. You don't want to distribute 140-degree water. So I think those are all changes. I don't know if I answered your question, but I tried.
Not really, but for one example, we have one customer who had a central plant system. It's a very large apartment complex, and she wanted to go to individual. And the only reason she turned away from that is because of the power grid she had to change. It was 20 times more expensive than the operation of the system over 10 years.
Yeah, and I think what he's looking at is now that the system's really old, I've got these things that I have to replace. So that's the advantage of the district, is the really expensive things, that the slow payback, and then of course the technology that can be with them is the district's responsibility. And then he has simpler, easier equipment to do what he needs in his building. Does he want to distribute water for radiant floors, or he wants to distribute it to fan coils, or he wants to distribute chill water? Then he can still do those things. There are rooftop heat pumps that automatically will save him 30% of his operating energy. Those kind of things exist now. So there's so many different ways to do a multifamily. There's systems called one pipe. Our industry doesn't do a very good job, I think, of getting all the information out. Any other questions? In the back?
In your opinion, what is the recommended size of a district for it to be effective? Like, what's too large, what's too small for residential?
For a district, there's multiple thoughts on that because you can tie the districts together. One of the largest ones I know about is like 1,200 tons, but there's bigger. An ideal thought process, according to the people at Mindset right now, has been that it probably needs to be at least 300 tons, and then maybe on one connected loop that it's up to like 1,000, or maybe 1,200. But that has to do with pipe size, and it's kind of a thought process of if the simplest 5G system is a water source heat pump, then what's the biggest water source heat pump system that I've done? 76 stories. So what was that? That was basically three systems inside those buildings. And the 5G districts are kind of the same way. You do this loop and you do that loop. One campus, what they do is they have geothermal like farms. So they have, here's a set, and it's kind of like rotating cattle in pasture, that kind of thing. So to go in and say, oh, I'm going to take this whole city and do it, no. I'd say outside of the city, around the school, around the public building, around the golf course, it's that phrase of look for thermal opportunities. Where is the sewage treatment plant discharging water too hot? Are they getting water that's too hot? Where can we take the heat? Where can we use the heat? You know, a little fast food franchise uses a lot of water and a lot of heat, and rejects a lot of heat as well. So, starting to think inside the buildings, and then looking at the opportunity to do building to building is the key. Thank you. Appreciate it.